He wasn't just a champion, he was a myth, a force of nature, a hurricane in gloves. Mike Tyson wasn't built for the spotlight. He was born from chaos, abandoned by his father, raised in violence, and arrested nearly 40 times before he was a teenager. Tyson's rise from the streets of Brooklyn to becoming the youngest heavyweight champion in history felt impossible. And yet, the fall came just as fast. Scandals, prison, rage, addiction. For years, Tyson was seen as everything wrong with fame and fighting. But behind the knockouts and meltdowns was a man at war with himself. And that war never really stopped. This is the story of how Mike Tyson conquered the world, lost everything, and came back. Not as Iron Mike, but as someone finally at peace. Before he was Iron Mike, before the millions, the belts, and the chaos, Mike Tyson was just a scared, angry kid in Brownsville, Brooklyn. He was born in 1966 to a life that didn't want him. His biological father abandoned the family early on, and his stepfather was more involved in street hustling than parenting. His mother, Lorna, struggled to raise Mike and his two siblings, moving constantly and barely scraping by. By age 7, Mike had already seen more violence than most adults. Street fights, guns, addicts, dead bodies on the sidewalk. It was a war zone masked as a neighborhood, and Tyson had to grow up fast or get swallowed. He had a high-pitched lisp, was overweight, and was relentlessly bullied. And that's when the violence started, not as offense, but as defense. But here's the twist. Tyson wasn't just fighting bullies. He was fighting for a sense of control. And the streets? They gave it to him. He started stealing, first little things, then bikes, jewelry, anything of value. Before his teen years, he was part of a gang called the Jolly Stompers. Not just a name, an actual crew that ran serious criminal errands. Mike became their enforcer. If someone owed money, Mike handled it. And he handled it violently. By the age of 13, Mike Tyson had already been arrested 38 times. He was sent to the Tryon School for Boys, a juvenile detention center upstate. Most kids went there and disappeared into the system. But Tyson's story flipped the moment he met Bobby Stewart, a former boxer working as a juvenile counselor. Stewart saw something in Tyson: raw power, speed, and more importantly, rage that could be channeled. He agreed to train Tyson under one condition: if he improved his behavior. And for once in his life, Mike listened. The training was simple: jabs, hooks, conditioning. But Tyson treated it like salvation. Stewart, stunned by Tyson's potential, introduced him to someone who would change everything: Cus D'Amato. Cus wasn't just a trainer. He was a philosopher of boxing, a man obsessed with turning fighters into gladiators of the mind. He had trained world champions before and was looking for one last pupil. He met Tyson. He watched him move, and he made a decision on the spot. This kid is going to be the youngest heavyweight champion in history. Cus took Tyson under his wing, legally adopting him after Tyson's mother died in 1982. With his biological family fractured and no real home to return to, Tyson suddenly found himself in a small house in upstate Catskill, New York, under the care of an old man who believed more in discipline than affection. But for Tyson, it was exactly what he needed. In the quiet town of Catskill, New York, Mike Tyson was being transformed. No longer the street kid stealing jewelry in Brooklyn. He was becoming a weapon. Cus D'Amato didn't just teach boxing. He taught psychology, discipline, fear, philosophy. He believed that success in the ring wasn't about strength. It was about mind control, the ability to dominate your opponent mentally before a single punch was thrown. And Tyson absorbed it like gospel. Under Cus's watch, Tyson's life became monastic. He didn't party, he didn't drink, he trained like a machine. Every day was a loop: wake up, study fight tapes, train, run, spar, repeat. Tyson memorized film of old-school greats: Jack Dempsey, Sonny Liston, Floyd Patterson, and internalized their aggression, footwork, and intimidation. Cus taught him a specific style: the peekaboo defense. Gloves up high, chin tucked, constant head movement, explosive power from close range. It was unorthodox, it was relentless, and Tyson executed it like a predator. But behind the gloves, Tyson remained a traumatized kid searching for approval. Cus became more than a trainer. He was Tyson's adopted father, a mentor who filled the void left by every adult who had ever abandoned or failed him. And Cus wasn't subtle about his expectations. He told Tyson that he would become the greatest fighter who ever lived, that his destiny was not only to win, but to dominate. And Tyson believed him. By the time Mike turned 16, he was already knocking out grown men in sparring. He entered the amateur boxing scene and destroyed it. Fights barely lasted a round. Word spread fast. Promoters, trainers, and reporters all heard of the teenager from Catskill who moved like a tank and hit like a missile. But in 1985, just before Tyson turned professional, tragedy struck. Cus D'Amato died. The man who had taken him off the streets, given him purpose, and built him into a machine was gone. Tyson was devastated. He wept at Cus's funeral, but instead of collapsing, he weaponized his grief. Every punch he threw after that was filled with the pain of that loss. He turned pro later that same year, and what followed was a meteoric rise unlike anything boxing had ever seen. Tyson didn't just win, he demolished. His first 19 professional fights were all victories. 12 of them ended in the first round. His movement was freakishly fast for a heavyweight. His fists looked like cannonballs, and his stare-downs? Terrifying. He wouldn't blink, wouldn't break eye contact. Opponents often walked to the ring defeated before the bell even rang. He was marketed as Kid Dynamite, later Iron Mike. But to the boxing world, he was something new, a force of nature. Tyson was more than a fighter. He was an event. His matches sold out arenas, dominated sports media, and began pulling in millions in pay-per-view revenue. He signed with Don King and began climbing the ranks toward the heavyweight title. Then, on November 22, 1986, at just 20 years old, he made history. Tyson destroyed Trevor Berbick to become the youngest heavyweight champion of all time. The fight lasted just 2 rounds. Berbick was knocked down 3 times by a single combo. He staggered across the ring like a drunk man on ice before the ref waved it off. A new era in boxing had begun. After defeating Trevor Berbick in 1986, Mike Tyson didn't just wear the heavyweight crown, he crushed the throne and rebuilt it in his own image. In the ring, he was an unstoppable juggernaut. Outside of it, the cracks had already begun. Fresh off the championship win, Tyson unified the WBC, WBA, and IBF titles, becoming the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world by the age of 21. No heavyweight had ever done it faster. His style wasn't finesse, it was fury. He swarmed opponents with head movement, hooks, uppercuts, and a kind of animal aggression the world hadn't seen since Sonny Liston. He didn't just win fights, he devoured them. Tyson's dominance was mesmerizing. He took down Larry Holmes, Muhammad Ali's successor, in 4 brutal rounds. Holmes had never been knocked out in his entire career until Tyson dismantled him. He floored Michael Spinks in 91 seconds. Pay-per-view numbers soared. Advertisers flooded in. Tyson wasn't just a boxer. He was the main event of American masculinity. Raw, violent, invincible. But behind the knockouts and headlines, Mike Tyson was spiraling. Without Cus D'Amato, he had no moral compass. His new management, especially Don King, was more interested in cashing checks than mentoring. King pushed Tyson into non-stop fights, media tours, and brand deals. The boxer who once lived like a monk was now living like a rock star. And it got messy, fast. In 1988, Tyson married actress Robin Givens. What began as a glamorous, tabloid-perfect love story quickly devolved into chaos. Givens would later call the relationship torture, pure hell. Tyson's outbursts, jealousy, and paranoia were fueled by trauma, insecurity, and, at times, drugs. Their infamous joint interview with Barbara Walters aired nationwide, with Givens describing Tyson as manic-depressive while he sat silently beside her. It was one of the most uncomfortable interviews in television history, and a crack in Tyson's mythos. Weeks later, Givens filed for divorce. Tyson's inner circle was no longer a team, it was a battlefield. Trainers quit, legal issues stacked up. He crashed his car into a tree, allegedly during a heated argument. Rumors of drug use began circulating. Don King tightened his grip. Tyson's finances were ballooning, but so was his instability. Still, he kept fighting. In 1989, he remained undefeated, but the focus was gone. He wasn't training like before. He was skipping road work, partying into the morning, sleeping with countless women. The rage that once fueled his precision now clouded it. And then, in 1990, the unthinkable happened. In Tokyo, he faced James Buster Douglas, a 42-1 underdog. No one gave Douglas a chance. Tyson entered the ring unfocused, undertrained, even reportedly dealing with a cold. What followed was one of the greatest upsets in sports history. Douglas knocked Tyson out in the 10th round. The invincible champion had fallen. The media turned instantly. Tyson wasn't just beaten, he was exposed. Rumors turned to scandals. Lawsuits followed. Endorsements vanished. His aura was gone. But what no one knew was, this wasn't the bottom. Tyson's real fall hadn't even started yet. After the Douglas loss, Mike Tyson's empire began to crumble, not with a punch, but with a courtroom. His fall wasn't just public, it was catastrophic. And it came fast. In 1991, Tyson was accused of raping 18-year-old beauty pageant contestant Desiree Washington in an Indianapolis hotel room. Tyson claimed the encounter was consensual. Washington said otherwise. The case went to trial in early 1992, and the media frenzy was immediate. Headlines weren't about jabs or title belts anymore. They were about shame, sex, and scandal. The trial was brutal. Tyson's defense focused on consent. The prosecution painted a portrait of power abused. Tyson never testified. The jury deliberated for less than 10 hours. The verdict? Guilty. Tyson was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He served just under 3. Behind bars, Tyson wasn't treated like a superstar. He was an inmate, and in the silence of his cell, he began to reflect, or at least to survive. He converted to Islam, adopting the name Malik Abdul Aziz. He read deeply, autobiographies, religious texts, military history, and while the outside world watched his downfall, Tyson was mentally regrouping. Still, prison didn't tame him. He got into fights with guards and inmates. He stayed volatile, angry, and unpredictable, yet he trained daily. The boxing ring wasn't gone from his life, it was just on pause. And the mystique? Strangely, it grew. For some fans, prison hardened Tyson's image. He wasn't just a fallen champion now, he was a warrior in exile. When he was released in 1995, Tyson was 29 years old, still young, still dangerous, and still determined to return. And return, he did. He stepped back into the ring and began steamrolling opponents. His power hadn't faded. He regained the WBA and WBC heavyweight titles in quick succession. But the opponents weren't elite, they were placeholders. Tyson wasn't building a legacy, he was rebuilding a brand. Behind the knockouts, the same demons lingered. Tyson was still impulsive, still chaotic. But now, the boxing world wanted blood. They wanted the real test. Evander Holyfield, a disciplined warrior, a strategist, a man Tyson had ducked for years. The first fight in 1996 shocked the world. Holyfield outclassed him, out-toughed him, and handed Tyson his second real defeat. But it wasn't over. The rematch came in 1997, and with it, the moment that would define Tyson's infamy. By June 28, 1997, Mike Tyson was no longer just fighting to win. He was fighting to stay relevant. And across from him, in the ring once again, was Evander Holyfield. Their first bout had shattered Tyson's aura. The world expected revenge. Tyson promised destruction. But what the world got was something no one saw coming. The rematch started tense. Holyfield controlled the pace. He was disciplined, precise, and mentally unshaken. Tyson, on the other hand, was reckless. By the second round, he was already frustrated. Headbutts, intentional or not, rattled him. His corner protested. He lost composure. Then came round 3. In a moment that would become the most infamous act in boxing history, Tyson lunged forward, not with a punch, but with his teeth, and bit off a piece of Holyfield's ear. Holyfield recoiled in agony. The ref paused the fight. Shock rippled through the crowd. Tyson was warned, but allowed to continue. Seconds later, he did it again. The referee had no choice. Tyson was disqualified. Chaos erupted in the ring. Fans rioted in the arena. Tyson was restrained by security. His mouthguard was bloodstained. The broadcast team was speechless. And in that instant, Iron Mike wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was a symbol of something darker, a man completely unhinged. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Tyson's boxing license was revoked. He was fined $3 million. Headlines exploded. Sponsors fled. Late-night talk shows ripped him apart. The Nevada State Athletic Commission condemned him as a disgrace to the sport. Even lifelong fans questioned whether Tyson could ever return, not just to boxing, but to any form of public life. But here's the twist. Tyson didn't deny it. He told reporters he bit Holyfield out of retaliation, out of frustration, out of rage. "I wanted to kill him," he said. "I was just angry." And in those words, the deeper truth emerged. This wasn't just about boxing. It was about a man who had never been taught how to lose, how to process pain, or how to live outside of violence. For years, Tyson had been trained as a weapon, but no one had taught him what to do when the battle was over. The incident sent Tyson further down a spiral. His name was synonymous with scandal. He tried a brief comeback in 1999, but was a shell of his former self. He fought fringe opponents, struggled with conditioning, and lashed out in interviews. And behind the scenes, his personal life was imploding. After the Holyfield earbite incident, Mike Tyson wasn't feared. He was pitied, mocked, and labeled dangerous in all the wrong ways. His decline was no longer subtle or symbolic. It was absolute. Inside the ring, he was unstable. Outside of it, he was unraveling. The late 90s and early 2000s were a blur of poor decisions and headline-grabbing meltdowns. Tyson bounced between failed comebacks and public spectacles. He fought Lennox Lewis in 2002, in a bout that was more media circus than boxing match. In the press conference, Tyson brawled with Lewis's team, cursed out reporters, and made graphic, disturbing threats. By fight night, fans weren't wondering if Tyson would win. They were wondering if he'd make it through the event without exploding. Lewis knocked Tyson out in the 8th round. It was clear. The king was dethroned, and no longer dangerous, just tragic. But the real blow came not from an opponent, but from a spreadsheet. In 2003, Mike Tyson filed for bankruptcy. Despite having earned over $300 million throughout his career, his fortune was gone. Lavish spending, hanger-ons, lawsuits, legal fees, Don King's predatory contracts, it all caught up. Tyson owed tens of millions. He auctioned off his mansions, cars, and prized possessions. The man who once ruled boxing now couldn't pay his bills. And worse, his identity was crumbling. No longer a champion, Tyson was lost. He made bizarre appearances. He tattooed half his face. He lashed out at interviewers. In one, now infamous 2004 press junket, Tyson said, "I want to rip his heart out and feed it to him." It was performance, and it was pain. Underneath the outbursts was a man suffocating in his own legacy. Behind closed doors, Tyson battled addiction, depression, and suicidal thoughts. He admitted to binging cocaine during training camps. He confessed to being high during fights. He said publicly, "I hate who I've become. I don't like that guy. I want to escape him." Yet even in this rock bottom, the first sparks of something different began to flicker. In 2006, he stepped into the ring for one final exhibition tour. It was low-key, a shadow of his former power. But Tyson was different, humble, apologetic, reflective. And then, in 2009, came something no one expected. The Undisputed Truth, a one-man stage show where Tyson stood before an audience and told his story. Raw, unfiltered, painfully honest. He talked about his childhood, his mother's death, his rape conviction, his bankruptcy, his regrets, his shame. And the crowd didn't boo. They clapped, because for the first time, Mike Tyson didn't punch. He spoke. He owned his story. And in doing so, he began the first real comeback of his life, not in boxing, but in humanity. By the late 2000s, Mike Tyson had stepped out of the ring and into something unexpected: introspection. No longer the snarling icon in silk trunks, Tyson was suddenly telling jokes on late-night shows, crying during interviews, and reflecting on the trauma he had spent a lifetime hiding from. It wasn't a rebrand, it was a transformation, and it began with vulnerability. Tyson's one-man show, The Undisputed Truth, became a hit on Broadway, then a successful HBO special directed by Spike Lee. But this wasn't just entertainment. It was therapy, public, raw, and radically honest. On stage, Tyson talked about everything: being molested as a child, being manipulated by Don King, his sexual insecurities, his time in prison, his loneliness. The man who once terrified opponents was now bearing his soul to standing ovations. Audiences didn't just listen, they connected. And then came The Hangover, 2009. Tyson's cameo as himself, self-deprecating, hilarious, and oddly charming, became a viral sensation. A new generation, who knew Tyson only from Scandal, suddenly saw a different side. A man who could laugh at his past while owning it. Hollywood came calling. But this time, Tyson wasn't the butt of the joke. He was part of the joke. Appearances in How I Met Your Mother, animated shows, and even a cartoon based on his life, Mike Tyson Mysteries, followed. And the public didn't recoil. They welcomed him, because beneath the tattoos and the legend was a man who had finally become human. But perhaps the most surprising evolution came in Tyson's spiritual life. He began publicly discussing his use of psychedelics, specifically 5-MeO-DMT, also known as the God molecule. Tyson described it as the most profound experience of his life. "It killed my ego," he said. "I saw that I was nothing, and in that, I saw everything." He wasn't speaking in boxing metaphors anymore. He was speaking like a monk. He promoted mental health, healing, and plant medicine. He became an advocate for psychedelic therapy, especially for trauma and PTSD. His podcast, Hotboxin', has hosted everyone from Wiz Khalifa to Eminem, giving listeners a window into Tyson's raw, unscripted thoughts on everything from death to discipline to forgiveness. In one episode, he broke down in tears, saying, "I miss the old me, but the old me is also the reason I almost died." That duality, the hunger and the healing, is why his redemption resonates. But peace hasn't made him soft. In 2020, at age 54, Tyson shocked the world again by stepping back into the ring for an exhibition fight against Roy Jones Jr. The hype was real. Two legends, one night. And Tyson? He looked sharp. Not Iron Mike sharp, but focused, controlled, dangerous in a new way. The bout ended in a draw, but the message was clear. Tyson wasn't fighting for belts. He was fighting for legacy, for discipline, for himself. And people saw it. Sponsors returned. New fans emerged. Old ones wept. not for the glory of youth, but for the triumph of survival. Still, Tyson remains haunted by relapse. He admits he struggles with the temptation of old vices. He's spoken about relapsing after years of sobriety, about the deep sorrow that lives in his chest, about needing purpose daily, or risk sinking. But now, his tools are different. He leans on meditation, on honesty, on community, and maybe most importantly, on storytelling. Tyson now tells his story so others can survive theirs. He speaks in schools, on stages, in studios, not as a saint, but as someone who's been through hell and made it out without pretending he came out clean. Because redemption, for Mike Tyson, is not a destination. It's a routine, a discipline, a fight. Mike Tyson's story isn't just about boxing. It never was. It's about the violent poetry of survival, about the contradictions of a man who could shatter jaws in seconds, yet now trembles at the idea of harming anyone again. It's about a boy born into chaos, who rose to unimaginable heights, fell harder than anyone expected, and somehow stood back up. Today, Tyson walks with more stillness than swagger. The same man who once said, "I want to eat your children," now says, "Ego is the enemy." It makes you think you're more than what you are. This isn't a brand pivot, it's transformation. Messy, imperfect, but real. He's more likely to quote philosophers than trash-talk boxers. He talks about love, legacy, and the deep work of forgiving yourself. "I'm not that person anymore," he says, "but I carry him with me every day." And that's what makes Tyson relevant in a world flooded with superficial comebacks. His redemption isn't sanitized. He doesn't hide his darkness. He drags it into the light. In doing so, he's created a model for how fame doesn't have to be fatal, how trauma doesn't have to win. Even now, at 58, his influence stretches far beyond the ring. He's become a symbol for second chances, for brutal honesty, for what it means to face yourself, without gloves, without fans, without illusions. He's inspired athletes, actors, addicts, and ordinary people who see in his story not just violence or victory, but transformation. And maybe that's the final paradox of Mike Tyson. The fighter known for raw destruction might be remembered most for the peace he fought hardest to find.